Today's session is on Revit placeholder families. Probably have a few more people joining us in just a few minutes as we get started. So I'll just do a brief introduction for myself and the content for today. If anybody's seen my webinars before, you'll know that I don't necessarily like PowerPoints. I like to get to the meat of the situation as quickly as we can, because I don't necessarily like to talk people to death without actually showing them something of value. So this is my personal opinion on how things should be done. There are times when a PowerPoint is really appropriate and can disseminate a lot of information, but when we're doing technical talks and webinars and whatnot, most of the time I prefer to really be in the application that we're talking about rather than just giving information only. So today's session is on Revit placeholder families. I'm Bruce Johnson. I'm a senior MEP technical specialist at ATG. I specialize in the MEP content. I also work a lot with all of our CTC tools, BIM 360 integrations and things like that. So if you guys ever have questions or need specific answers, here's another resource for you to reach out and or contact a salesperson or whatnot. You can go through our atgusa.com website to get to us and find resources there, ask questions, take advantage of our tech support. If you have products and services with us, your tech support is free. So a couple nice things to notice for our feature set in case you haven't dealt with ATG before and just popped in through LinkedIn or something like that and found us today. So placeholder families. Not sure if everybody knows necessarily what a placeholder family is, so I'll start with that and why we generate those. So a placeholder family typically is going to be something that you generate that you can use to either create new content very quickly. So if you think about Revit template families that are out there, there's a host of those that come with your Revit out of the box software, and a lot of those are very specific things like generic models or doors or things like that. Those have typical templates because they need to be associated to objects like wall ceilings or faces or things like that. So a lot of those are pre-built for you as kind of a starting point with some specific rules for those types of objects. So when I think of a placeholder family, usually I want a placeholder family to be very loose, easy to use, and be a starting point for every family of type that I want to build. And I might make a couple of specialty placeholder families specifically for face-based objects or things like that if I need them. But in most cases, a placeholder family is going to be very generic, but it is also going to be very parametric. So that means if I change a dimension between, say, reference planes within the family, it's going to resize for me in the way that it should based on my dimensional constraints. So those are things I take into account when I make a parametric family. Usually it's going to be like a generic model, and then I can go change the Revit category and do save as and turn it into whatever I want. So usually when I do family creation and content creation classes, I like to start out with that as a general rule. Make a family that you can turn into any kind of object that you're actually going to need to use within your model. I've also done that a lot with the generic model unhosted to anything not face-based. So I can have unhosted objects rather than hosted objects in my model. Those would be fantastic, obviously, if I had maybe, say, a light fixture or something that would be a ceiling mounted object or something like that. And I need them in a CAD background, or I have no Revit background whatsoever, just a flat 2D. But I want to actually push those into a 3D space at an actual height. I'd be able to place that element, tell it what the offset from the floor was, and then be able to place as many of those as I want without any planes, work planes, or ceilings to host it to. I would still be able to work in that CAD background where I wouldn't be able to do that with my normal, say, MEP geometry that's always face-based. I would have to use a work plane at that point. And if ceilings were all different across the entire model, then maybe there's 20 different ceiling heights. That means I would have to have 20 different work planes just to attach those correctly. So little ideas like that mean an unhosted family would work a lot better. In that case, I would just change the elevation in every room and be able to do any connections if I had conduits or if it's pipe fittings or sprinkler heads or air terminals, things like that. Any of those could be theoretically unhosted objects if I used a placeholder family to build them. So that's a little bit of background information on what a placeholder family could be, right? as far as geometry goes, you can also put shared parameters in those placeholder families, which means you could have a placeholder that is basically LOD 100. You can just make it any size and shape and place it wherever you want. But maybe I have highly developed shared parameters that actually schedule that object correctly. So then I could have my placeholder family become anything that I want, but have the right shared parameters to be say a light fixture or an air terminal or a park bench outside or furniture or a custom shaped kind of a wall or something like that. Maybe there's a climbing wall in a gym that you're modeling and you're doing that with a family with some basic parameters that give you the ability to give it a slant or something like that. And then attach little objects to it that make it easy to climb for the climber or whatnot, or challenging to climb. So anything you can think of, your imagination throws out there, you can probably build something that will give you a good start and then use that family build to generate anything that you want from that. So just got to think about a little bit of the rules of creating families. So the goals of the class here today basically are why to create a placeholder family. So before you begin creating one, why would you do that in the first place? You may not have a family that works. You can't find it on the manufacturer's website. They don't have anything Revit. Maybe they've got an old CAD file system or something like that. Or there's maybe a step file or an ASIS file or something that you could get from them, but no real data or metadata or shared parameters associated to it whatsoever. Those would be reasons to generate your own. If the manufacturer builds them for you on the fly, like in the case of mechanical equipment, like from Train, if it's an air handler or rooftop unit or something like that, you might give them very specific data from your analysis software, send that off to them, and they generate the piece of equipment. But if you need something to say place in a DD set and you haven't gotten your thing back from Train yet, you might have a placeholder family to sit in its place while you're waiting for the one from the manufacturer. Also, the ones from the manufacturer usually don't have the same shared parameters that you're going to use in your schedules. Therefore, if you were to use a placeholder, you could have the shared parameters that you need already filled out in DD, but maybe at 50% CD, you get the real piece of equipment. You'd be able to, instead of replacing the entire family and type swap it with the new one that you've gotten from the manufacturer, you could just nest their 3D geometry into yours that already has all the shared parameters and skip the step of loading all of their shared parameters or your shared parameters into their file so that it actually does schedule correctly. So that's a nice little component object there. If you also have more generic jobs where you're not doing anything to say level 300 for LOD, and you just need a box, so you get a DWG file as a piece of industrial equipment from China or something like that that's going to be ordered for a job. And it's 80 feet long and 50 feet wide and 20 feet tall and has 300 connections on it for all kinds of pipes and electrical connectors and things like that. But most of those aren't really necessary, and it's modeled down to every single nut, bolt, and washer for every little connection piece that goes onto it. If it's modeled as LOD 500 or better or whatnot, but you only need the actual connection points, a placeholder family would be much better for that, just for the fact that you would not have, say, a 30 or 40 or 50 meg CAD file now embedded in your Revit model. And if that was to be done 3 or 4 or 5 times, model performance gets really, really bad when you have very large DWGs inside of Revit. So that'd be another reason not to use their actual real equipment family or equipment file and maybe embed it in a family and put the connectors on it. It would just be way too big and slow down your model dramatically in that case. And then the last piece there, schedule parameters are embedded and actually work. Basically what that means, like I said, is if you pre-embed the shared parameters in the placeholder family of type that you're creating from, then you don't have to do that every single time. So if you knew you were going to build 20 different light fixtures, for instance, you could make one placeholder family, save as light fixture, add all your shared parameters to it, and then use that basic family to generate all your other shapes and whatnot, and do a save as for each of the other 19 objects, and then place those in your library. And then you've got placeholders that work for all your basic shapes and types. So if there were round, down lights, recessed, semi-recessed, square ones, 2x4s, 12 by 12s, all different shapes of LEDs and stuff that are coming out now. You could make a few placeholder families with all your shared parameters and have those parameters work with your schedules and never have to download something from a manufacturer website. Because if you go to like Lithonia or Daylight, sometimes you have the options for hundreds, if not thousands of families to download. And the only real benefit in most of those is you'd get their IES files as well embedded in their direct family. But if they don't schedule, you can spend a lot more time adding those shared parameters 100% into their families to make them work for you than you would just re-embedding the new IES file in your placeholder family in that case. So things to consider when you're talking about placeholder families. So let's take a peek into Revit, and I'll shut down my PowerPoint at this point. It's probably the longest I've ever talked within the range of PowerPoints, but just wanted to give you the best background I could in that case to get started. All right, so under my Revit session here, this is a family that I generated, and I actually call this a placeholder cube. So this would be an example of what I do in a normal family creation class. If somebody wants to take that class, contact us. I usually do 8 hours. I think we have a syllabus that does 20 hours or 24 hours or something for generating basic family content and some examples of those. Usually I don't like to go through all of that because it goes through lookup tables and type catalogs and everything else beyond. But in 8 hours, usually I can cover making a placeholder family, generating shared parameters, talking about family parameters, how to control those, how to embed nested links, and get those components with their parameters to work with the parameters in your main family in that case. So if you need to pass through one parameter into another family from a nest, there's a way to do that and make it link correctly and schedule correctly in that case. So we can take manufacturer's equipment, embed them into a mechanic or a placeholder family, and then turn that into the real piece of equipment or light fixture or whatever we want. But usually, if you've got more than say 4 or 5 parameters, I probably wouldn't necessarily do that. I'd probably just load my real shared parameters into the family in that case and not have to think about doing links from one to another. So a lot of good theory in how to create a good family. So in this case, like I say, this is just a cube. So if I click on it, right click, edit family, I'll show the basics of this object. This is just a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot cube. So if I look at my properties on there, my length, width, and height is just 1 foot. And then I have this parameter called a base offset. Inside a normal generic model, it has a default value for the offset. I've actually removed that in this case and changed it to my own dimension called base offset. I don't like to have the out-of-the-box content and parameters always used. I like to have my own very specific way to do it. And if I've used my placeholder family to generate anything from that, then I know exactly what my shared parameters are that I've used. And I have full control over all of my settings. If I were to go to, say, a front view, where I have my base offset here, right now it's set to 1 foot, so it's just floating up in the air a foot above the ground. But if I change my base offset to 0, it'll snap back down to the reference level in this case. Autodesk's default origin point, which would be a reference plane that sits at the exact same level as the reference level, is actually locked to the reference level. So even though you can change that and make it reference a different height, I don't like the fact that it has a lock on it that you'd have to unlock to unconstrain it from the level, which basically means it sits on the floor. So by giving myself a base offset here, basically what I've done is said, I can change my base offset and always float this thing wherever I want without ever busting a constraint. So it's just one of those little things that I like to do when I generate a placeholder family. And then all of my reference planes are the things that are dimensioned. So my length, my width, and my height are just those feature parameters. And I can turn this into whatever I want. If I want to have 10 different objects of 10 different sizes, then I can merely just go in and change those 3 dimensions, what their values are for length, width, and height, If it's going to be sitting on the floor, I don't change my base offset or anything. I just let it sit there. But if it needs to be like a countertop at 36 inches or something like that off the floor, or 30 inches off the floor, I can just make those changes on the fly and it becomes what I want it to be. So again, this is a version of an unhosted family. I could do the exact same feature set with a face-based object and have controls on that the same. So then I could attach that to a floor, a vertical face or a ceiling or a roof or something like that as well. I wouldn't typically go beyond that with the placeholder family to specifically a wall-based or a ceiling-based or something like that, unless I knew that I also had to cut holes in the ceiling or the wall objects. In those cases, that would be the only other reason to generate another family type like that. So if it was an object that penetrates a wall, such as a hole for a damper or something like that, maybe I would generate that as a wall-based object and then use a void object inside the family to give me exactly what I wanted in that case. So again, ideas behind placeholders, kind of how they work. I didn't add any shared parameters for things that go in schedules here at this point, but that would be something I could further elaborate on to move forward in that case. So I have at least one chat. Are your reference planes strong or weak references? I typically leave them as strong references. I haven't necessarily done any families with weak references yet. I know there's reasons for them, but in most cases, I'm not generating anything that is extra complicated, but I will show examples in just a little bit of probably the most complicated placeholder-like family that I've ever seen. That comes in our MEPPP, which is our mechanical, electrical, plumbing productivity pack. I want to try to keep it more generic for speaking and talking points, so that anybody who's in architecture or structure viewing this data doesn't go, oh gosh, that's just MEP stuff and that's not for me. These are more concept-based ideas that anybody can use. So not necessarily going to say, oh, I'm going to show everybody in this group how to do connectors today, right? That's not necessarily as deep as I want to go in the webinar. We can definitely get to that in product demonstrations for you guys that would be individual to your firms or whatnot. We do those all the time. Giving ideas for how to fix complex challenges and whatnot. Those are things we do almost every day through our sales force, getting meetings with our clients and showing better ideas or new ideas on solving actual customer issues. So if you have something very specific that you're struggling with, I encourage you to reach out to ATG, find out who your salesperson might be, and then schedule a demo. And we can do usually a discovery call first to find out what your needs are, and then find out if that's something that you guys just needed a quick tip or something like that. You get right back to work and see if you can solve it. If it's something that it's a tech support issue or something like that, where, hey, it's broken, I can't figure out why it isn't working the way I would expect it to work based on the documentation or training that we've had or something like that, we can get answers to questions like that. And then if it's a specific, we really don't know how to do this and we really want to be able to do it, then we can discuss training options and hours and things like that to get you back on track to where you need to be. And if it's something where you say, well, training sounds great, but we're always busy and our company owners decide that we need to be like 99% billable all the time, if not 120% billable all the time for week to week, and you absolutely have no time. We also do team augmentation work and consulting. So if you need families built, you need extra help on projects, things like that. All those things are within our scopes of work that we accomplish through ATG. So ask and we'll see what we can do for you. All right, so more on my placeholders. So that's my general placeholder, right? If I go back into my model, I'm not actually going to change it at all right now. If I needed to make extra types and things like that, I can build this super easy. So if I look at my placeholder cube and go to my type properties, in this case, if I were to change my length to say 6 feet, my width to say 4 feet, and my height to maybe 3 feet, and drop that down the deck so it's on 0 elevation. I just change that object in seconds to be exactly the size and shape that maybe I need to to host. Let's just say I need a new pump or something like that, or a hot water heater or boiler or something like that in that model. I could change that to the actual size, go back into the family, add the connectors of type for if it was water piping or if it was ductwork or something like that. I could add those connectors onto the side or the face that I want, maybe a little extrusion, add a few extra parameters to control it and tell it where I want it to schedule that, and I'm pretty much done. So using a template like this to build just about anything is very quick. So again, if I were to go edit family, because I have the placeholder family, I could just leave it in the model as like an LOD 100 with a couple of connectors on it. And as long as I had a cut sheet and said this was actually supposed to be 3 foot 3 inches and 3 3/8 inches or something long, I could type in those values. It's going to stretch to that length. And then when I put my connector on it, if it was a pump, centrifugal pump or something like that, and it had an odd shape, I'm still getting at least my boundary, and it will clash detect and say Navisworks or something like that. So if it had a bulbous shape on one end and a thin piece on the end where a pipe comes out, and then I was running more piping through there or something, and I got the clash, I would know I need to ignore that if I knew that it wasn't really going to touch, right? So things like that, I can kind of ponder, do I really need the real object, or can I just use the placeholder and put the real connectors on it where they go? And still have a model that is represented well, and this object actually does schedule at that point, right? So considering all that, if I were to go, see, I'm in my family now, right? Yes. All right, so if I decide to do a category change, and maybe this is now a piece of mechanical equipment instead, once I change that to mechanical, it's going to typically add any extra components in there. If I wanted to leave it generic model, oops, I'm bouncing around here too much. Leave it generic model, but in like MEP, it'll show up grayscale in the model because it's a MEPP view. Coordination views and architecture, it'll show up black. So if I wanted to make it, say, a structural foundation or something like that, maybe I'll change that category. And then when I do that, if I go to File, Save As, I'll save it as a family. Put that in my webinar folder for today. And instead of Flex Cube, maybe I'll make this housekeeping pad. I've done that before, so it knows that I can make it that. So I make it into a housekeeping pad and then change my dimensions. So now maybe it's a 8 foot by 6 foot by 6 inch thick. So now I've got a housekeeping pad of 8 by 6 by 6 inches. If I did a rename, I got to make a new one. 8x 6x 0.5 or something like that. Oops, why did I do 1.5? That's all right. X. So now I've got a type, right? If I want to generate a new type, maybe this is 10x 8x 8 inch or something like that. Let's just change my dimensions. 10 there, 8 there, and 8 inches. So now I've got two types of housekeeping pad, two sizes. I could go back and leave my original cube in there if I wanted to as well, just as a generic kind of a placeholder. Turn it into any size that I want based on its type. Or I could have changed all of the length, width, and height parameters to instance parameters instead of type parameters. So they show up in the properties window instead of controlling them individually by types, right? So I load back into project, go back in my sample project. There's my new last object I just built. I do another one here and copy that down. Then I can use my type selector, change that to the big one. So now those are my two housekeeping pads that I built. So whether it's structural elements, whether it is electrical objects, if it's a custom ramp or something like that for an architectural slope down to a sidewalk outside or something like that, or a ramp that's on a warehouse platform or something like that going down to a truck, or whatever that needs to be. You can make placeholders for literally just about anything. And then anything that you have that is really negligent on families due to manufacturers. It's anything concrete, most of the time, there's not a whole lot of pre-built concrete objects out there, right? So just kind of think on the fly, what kind of objects can I build with placeholders and have really good content that I can manipulate anytime that I want, any way, shape, or form that I want, and not have to spend a lot of time on it. So ideally, if I've got a placeholder family, I can generate a 3D piece of equipment from it within 3 to 10 minutes in most cases. Maybe as fast as 30 seconds if I know exactly what I want and I've already done it before, because that placeholder family already reacts the way I want it to. If I had a good master shared parameter file for the piece of equipment or type that I want to schedule from, then I can use things like my CTC software. Parameter jammer basically adds any kind of scheduled parameters into the content. So if I were to do schedules, in this case, I just made a structural foundation, right? So if I generate a new one, so maybe I've got a description that I want to throw in there. Maybe the family name needs to go in there, and model and mark number maybe. So now I've got a schedule, right? And those are things that I want to have that object understand is in its model element. So if I pick on it, do I actually have those things in here? That's the first question. Sometimes when I change, I'll be able to get the shared parameters get dumped in automatically. In this case, it doesn't look like those parameters are there. So if I were to go to my CTC software and choose parameter jammer and choose my brand new schedule in my brand new housekeeping pad, essentially what's going to do is look at my schedule, look at the parameters in the schedule, and then help me force those parameters into my housekeeping pad so it can actually be scheduled correctly. Looks like in this case, I didn't have any extra shared parameters that weren't already embedded in the family in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, I would have had a list of things that it was going to blast in. So if I just say next, anything it needs to process is going to be pushed into the family. It didn't process anything there. Let me think. I don't have a shared parameter file. I can find something extra or new to place in there that wouldn't necessarily be there already. But that's the general rule of parameter jammer is if you have a schedule and you have a family, you can tell the schedule to push all the parameters that are needed for the schedule directly into the family. And once it's done, then when you go back to your schedule itself, you should be able to see all the extra parameters being filled out with the proper parameter types. So if there was a field for specific gravity or density or weight or something like that, then we should be able to get those in as the parameters of type that they came from. So there's another question here. Are you aware of DynamoScript that can be used in lieu of parameter jammer? I'm sure there are some out there. Doesn't mean that I necessarily know of them or where you would go out and find them, right? There's a lot of free stuff out there for Dynamo. There's a lot of stuff that's been worked on by engineers and architects and whatnot to make Dynamo scripts and then share them across groups and whatnot for the ability to anybody to use them just because they found a unique thing that they want to do with it or whatnot, and they're pushing it out there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your Dynamo script that you're receiving actually does work perfectly for you. And you actually need to tweak that and turn it into something that works more specifically for you. So an example of that would be in my previous job, I had a guy that was a young EIT type mechanical engineer in training. And he found a Dynamo script that said, I can take a architectural file and find all the fire rated walls and then go place a damper in those fire rated walls, which is inside my ductwork. So he read the description of it and said, that is fantastic. I want that because I have to go back and manually find and place upwards of 100 dampers in this large, say, medical building or or office building. Every time we have this type of building, it takes me 2 days to go put dampers in. So he loved the idea that he found a Dynamo script that would do that for him. But at the same time, he didn't necessarily realize when he tried to use it and tried to edit it over and over again that it wasn't reading architecture through his mechanical file link. It was just adding damper holes with the family type that was given in the architectural file. So architecture located those hole locations and it worked in the architecture file, not in the mechanical file. So word of caution on Dynamo, try to evaluate what your Dynamo script is doing, how it works, and then if it needs to be rewritten or add new nodes or whatever that might be, or get the extra scripting tools from lots of other developers out there that have developed ways, or either Python or C# ways or something like that of making their Dynamo scripts work correctly. There's a lot of stuff with the API that isn't fully open, in my opinion, to Dynamo, to what you actually really want it to do. And there's tons of really, really good stuff out there that Dynamo does. But sometimes if you're more of a novice user of Dynamo and you're trying to figure out and troubleshoot why Dynamo isn't doing what it's supposed to do, there could be lots and lots of reasons that you may not be getting exactly what you want and may not be able to troubleshoot it yourself. So always err with caution at that point. If it does exactly what you want, fantastic. And it was free, extra fantastic. If you want it to be like a permanent button on your ribbon or something like that, you'd probably have to do something with either Python or C# or something like that, turn into software that runs the macro for the Dynamo, and then makes it more like an actual program to run that is accessible on a toolbar or something like that. So digressed a little bit there, but that's okay. So yeah, generative design, things like that, Dynamo's pretty fantastic stuff. Being able to twist buildings and all that when it comes down to troubleshooting and figuring out exact reasons why things don't work, like through links and whatnot. I know it can be done and can be done well. I'm not a Dynamo expert, but I have dabbled enough to know that I don't like debugging stuff that I've written. So, all right, back into placeholderisms here. So let's see, I wanted to show an example from the productivity pack of a air handling unit family. And if I look at my mechanical equipment here, you notice I have an air handling unit custom. So under custom, I have these extra types. So I would say in this case, this air handling unit isn't necessarily just a placeholder family. The things I've been talking about, right? To generate your own thing on the fly and make it work. This is an example of a fully functional air handling unit from our productivity pack, but it says it's custom, and that means the parameters that are used in it, if I do my edit type, oops, jump into the air handler by selecting it first, how about that? And then if I look at my parameters here, you'll notice the parameters are quite extensive. There's lots of them just on the instance parameters, specifically all the mechanical stuff that I would need to schedule. And then on the type parameters, we also have the construction information. What is the upflow, the downflow, directional components? Does the equipment have a reheat coil, preheat coil, heating coil, condensing coil, steam coil? Checkboxes to turn those on or off, essentially. So this one air handler is, I would say, kind of overthought more than anything else. It has every bell and whistle you could possibly think in it, and you can turn things on and off visibly with checkboxes. But the overall size is dimensional with equipment width, equipment length, and height. So there is a center point of this family right in here. So when you do your insert, it actually comes in there. And then your equipment width and length and height actually stretches away or to that origin point based on the actual dimensions. So no matter what object you would get back from, say, Train or other mechanical companies that do air handling units, you should be able to come in here and say, I want to change my length, width, and height to the actual cut sheet length. And you have a realistically real object by size at that point, as if it was just my placeholder cube with these 3 dimensions, right? But it also has the red areas or the dashed areas that come off the side of the box. There's clearance areas, which also have their component to do clash detection with, right? So in a real train air handler, which is the one up above right here, it has individual clearance areas off of unit types or whatnot or components. This one just has a side clearance. So not quite as detailed as what this one is as far as the actual clearance, but if I was using this one in its place, I would just stretch out that clearance area to that widest width and call that good for the most part. So again, this is an example. Because it says custom in the name, it means you can customize it to be anything that you want. So this is probably one of the most advanced placeholders-like families. There really is a version with everything that I might need in it all at once. It probably took somebody at least 100 hours just to build this one family with all the shared parameters that are in it. There's also another tool inside of it called the Articulated Cartesian Arm, which is unique to the productivity pack, which is also a family. One of the things in there, if I can find it in the right place. Here we have other parameters, so the clearance areas, the size of those for each side. I can change those dimensions. Again, that's just the 3D geometry, right? But if I look at vent duct position, outlet duct position, waste pipe flow, things like that, these are inlet duct position, exhaust duct position, electrical position. You'll notice that some of these have degrees of rotation. So in this particular family, they've used what's called a articulated Cartesian arm in the family. And each one of the extrusions for the duct inlet, duct outlet, any piping that may go into it, any of those that have positions here, you could change that position with a value or an angle, 90, 0, 180, 270. And each one of those angles is associated to a face of the object. So if you knew that your, say, inlet duct position came through the roof to the rooftop, so coming from underneath, I could change my inlet duct position if it wasn't already 0, which was on the origin face of the bottom of the family. I could change that to a 90, for instance, and it should go to the right side face. But if I did a minus 90, it would go to the left side face. And then I would also have dimensions on that duct position that I could move that connector and extrusion around on that face with dimensions as well. So I'd have full control dimensionally and on face of every object that I've placed as an extrusion in that family. So again, with placeholder families and family builds, you can get as bare bones like my cube as you want, or you can get as serious as you want with functionality where you're really programming a tool that can kind of metamorphosize into whatever you want in that case. And all those parameters in there, I think there's like 400 or 500 parameters in this one family alone for all the scheduling capabilities that are in the pack. So if you are in MEPPP and you guys want to see a product demonstration of that stuff, if you don't have it currently, schedule that with a sales rep and we can spend some time with you. Usually it takes about 1 to 2 hours to go through the majority of the things in the pack, get you a better understanding of what's in it. But again, from a really basic cube object all the way up to a family that's made to turn into a custom some kind of air handler. That's kind of the extremes that we have between the two. So this one here is actually a train air handler. So it is a device that came directly from train. I got that from a project I worked on with a MEP training a little while back. So if I do an edit family on it and look at the properties here, you'll notice that the parameters that are embedded in there are kind of lackluster compared to the ones that are in the one that I have pre-built, right? But in here, I do have a length, width, and height cube, basically, which is an air handler. So if this object here doesn't have any of the parameters that I actually need right now, I could go in and parameter jam it and push all those directly into the family. But if there's any formulas in there, like this coil run drain pan radius times 2, if there's more of those formula types in my schedules or my shared parameters that I need embedded in this family, parameter jammer does not push the schedules or the the formulas directly into the family. It only pushes a parameters used for the value, so that you can type in those values maybe from a cut sheet. So if we look at another tool, the family processor has the ability to work on the family that I'm in currently and be able to do things like change parameters. So if I look at the parameters that are in the family now, I could delete them on this tab, choose the ones that I don't want anymore. I could add new shared parameters. So if I were to browse to a shared parameter file, let's go to demo and shared parameters. There we go. So here's a 2700 shared parameter file here, so I can browse to whatever parameters that I want to add from that file. I could add family parameters within this tool, replace with shared parameters. So if I take some parameters from in here and I say I want to add it down below, then I could look into my shared parameter file and find something to replace it with. That's my real shared parameter. So as long as the parameter type is exactly the same, it'll let me do that. If instead of, say, the parameter type being HVAC airflow was mechanical equipment by parameter type or group, I wouldn't be able to do a change in this particular window, I don't believe. So in that particular case, the parameter type does matter. In most cases, I've had a few errors trying to do that, in which case I would delete the parameter first and then add the parameter second of the one that I actually wanted it to be. And that's all done in a script that we have control over as well. And then there's also parameters to change. Under parameters to change, if I say, maybe I grab this air mixing airflow or whatever, and say, change that parameter, I want to maybe even change the current name to a new name. Is it an instance or a type? If I pick on this drop down, I can not change anything. Or if it was a type, I could change it to an instance. If it was an instance, I could change it to a type. I can swap those around. The parameter type does not let me change it here. If it had a new default value, I could push a default value if I wanted it to always be 0 CFM, so I would know if I typed in a value or something like that. I could make it a new value as I finish the family. Or if it's a formula that says, hey, there's a existing CB1X length in construction that always equals my total width of my equipment width in the family that I had before, right? I could say equals equipment width, and then those parameters would be interchangeable at that point in the family thereafter. And do I want to change the group to another group in my shared parameter file? I could do that as well inside this tool. So lots of things we can do with parameters here. When we do processing order, again, we can do things like change the order of the things it can do. Add or delete lookup tables, change materials, change parameters, all these components of things that we can do. They happen in the order we change them in. So one could happen before the other starts or whatnot. The current family could be changed, or we could do multiple families. We could browse to entire folders, entire directories. If you had like a parameter that maybe sets the order of the listing of the equipment in the schedule or something like that. So maybe it's a schedule index number or something like that. And that goes into all families from this point on. I could browse to every folder in my entire family library, add them all, and say, just add that one parameter to all my families. Save over the top of the existing ones, or I could even write them to a new folder, having them rebuilt and or renamed at that point with a edited in the name, or a couple different other ways we could do that. If it doesn't have type catalog, I could generate a type catalog there. There's quite a few other options here. There's also an interesting tool here that says create new shared parameters file from all the unique shared parameters found in families. If you were to download a manufacturer library of some sort, I could come into this tool, turn all the other tools off, just go to my select families and begin, select that folder of families, check that one button and say, write a shared parameter file with all the unique shared parameters that came directly from that manufacturer site. Then I would have a way to choose if I wanted to include some of their shared parameters in my master shared parameter list, things like that would help me in scheduling later if I wanted to actually use their parameters in my schedules. So when it gets down to the nuts and bolts of what we are using placeholder families for, occasionally we will start and make a placeholder family that does get replaced. So this would be potentially a LOD 100 kind of a scenario, and replaced with something else that is more specific to my actual needs later, because maybe I either didn't know what I wanted, or I'm just guessing size, maybe because I'm an SD or DD and not really fully ready to commit to a manufacturer or some existing content that really is out there. Placeholder family works very well for that. If you go a little bit deeper with placeholder families and you generate your shared parameters, but you don't need anything higher LOD than say 100, 200, or 300, depending on the block that you built. You can usually get away with using a placeholder if the only thing that's available to you is super detailed and it blows up your model, or there's nothing available to you whatsoever. And maybe you're like a custom kitchen equipment manufacturer rep or something like that, and trying to put in a brand new super domed pizza oven or something crazy. Again, you could build a placeholder family that is the right shape for that. Does it fit in the building? You'll know, yes, you can get it in there based on your placeholder family or whatnot, and even do some staging type stuff with placeholder families with Navisworks if you want to. So there's lots of reasons to use a placeholder family in that case. But again, you could get extra super detailed and create something that's got everything you need in it, and then kind of pare it down to the actual thing that you're building, and have a brand new air handler in 2 minutes that would have taken you 2 hours before. So based on my example there. So the other thing that we could do with the placeholder family, where there's a really good family with all of my shared parameters already in it, such as this one right here, right? So if I were to do edit family on that, we can see right now I've got the gray box is my normal shape, right? So if I were to go into my, where is it? My train object and place, I'm just dragging this from File Explorer into my family here. It's going to open it unto itself, but I'm going to load it into project and load it into my air handling unit instead of my actual project. And what we'll see is I get a smaller version of my real air handler here. So I already just placed that out in space. Maybe I've only got clearance on one side. So in this particular family, maybe I delete my clearance areas there. I don't need those anymore because I'm only going to have clearance on this one side. I do have some connectors on there that I'm going to need to move or whatnot. So again, using this particular tool, I'd be able to change my degrees of orientation and flip it to a front face, side face, or whatever. So that wouldn't take too long. I'm not going to do all that right now. I'm just going to take the object as a nest, as a 3D object, and move it. Let's see, this thing is a corner-based object, and this one is a center-based object. So for illustration purposes, all I'm going to do is take this and stick it right there, right? So to have my real air handling family that has all my shared parameters in it be maintained, all I'm going to do is do a save as in this case. Actually, do one more thing first. I take my gray box of my air handler and tell it that that's no longer visible in that family, and then I'm going to do a save as. So save as family, and not mechanical equipment, but webinars and placeholder families. And I call it train custom RFA. So in just a few moments, I've taken my 3D geometry, mapped it into my air handling unit, gave it a new name. And when I say load back into project under my sample project, now I've got an object that looks like the train, but actually still is my custom air handler. So you can see it looks like that one right there, right? I've still got a couple things I need to fix on it, which are my my extrusions for my size of my extrusions and the placement of my extrusions. I need to match them to that air handler there. But the 3D component, the big box there, isn't there anymore. So if I go to a 3D view, the family I started with all of my shared parameters is this one, right? So all those shared parameters are there. This is the real train air handler, which has very few shared parameters. I pick on the one that looks exactly like this train one, and I'll do the basic fix on those extrusions and connectors later. But it now has all of my shared parameters. And if I was using this one originally, right, I could have saved it back as the exact same name as I had here before and just overwritten it where I would have just the train geometry and I have all my shared parameters. If I was all the way through DD before I got this piece of geometry, and maybe I had half the schedule already filled out with data that I need, why would I want to take the train one, take the time to parameter jam or fix all the shared parameters in it, and then go re-enter all that data? Well, I can just take the 3D geometry, stick it in as a nest into my real one that already has my parameters ready in schedule, and then just fill out the rest based on the final cut sheet that I get. So a massive amount of time savings just by being able to manipulate the existing family instead of fully doing a replace. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. There's one more piece that comes in the mechanical pack that I found just a few days or a few weeks ago, somewhere in there. I saw it, but I only opened it up today. And I pick on this little piece here, and it says there's let's do the other one first. There's one that's called the mechanical equipment configurator, which is basically made as a kind of a placeholder to build any kind of mechanical equipment. And then there's another one that I found here that says it's a mechanical equipment configurator data only. Place and schedule anywhere. So in theory, if I were to bring in this trace air handler, and I know it doesn't have all the parameters that I need, I could take this guy and just stick it right there. So place it somewhere within the boundary of that object, and maybe even make it the same size as like the little end unit or something right there. All this is really giving me is all of the shared parameters. So when I work in the productivity pack, and anybody that does any mechanical whatsoever and has done schedules, live schedules in Revit instead of using Excel, you'll know that to do mechanical equipment schedules, you need to have some way of differentiating what those schedules contain. So the way it's done inside the pack is there's a parameter called schedule appears on. So if you fill out the schedule appears on with something like contains AHU or VAV or something to that nature, what type of equipment is it? Boiler, chiller, water tank, whatever it might be. Those are all pieces of mechanical equipment by Revit category, and they need to be separated on schedule, so you don't have one master schedule with every bit of mechanical equipment in it. So having a parameter like that, you can actually say, I want to schedule this thing in my schedule and keep everything else in mechanical equipment world completely away from it. So in theory, if you had a placeholder family that's made for shared parameters, and that's all it does, it's just a cube or a box of some sort. You could even turn the invisibility off, but it'd be hard to select it at that point if you can't pick on it somewhere, right, to find the properties of it. But this has a geometry identity mark, a geometry schedule appears on. So if I filled out that value as AHU, and the top one being AHU-1 or something like that as its mark number, then I could place this object in my model and schedule that object instead of this one, which I would not tell it what my schedule appears on. I would just place my placeholder data tool directly on it in it somewhere and kind of hide it in there. And then I'd be able to see it in my schedule. And it's kind of like an electrical user placing a disconnect switch on a piece of mechanical equipment and then typing all the load data in on it so it can be circuited inside of Revit, right? It's almost the exact same idea. It's just another way to say, too complicated for me to mess with families all day. Let me make a placeholder that just contains data, and I can schedule that data directly from that object instead of the thing that I brought in that's a monstrous beast that I don't want to change. So again, some interesting concepts and ideas related to placeholder families inside of Revit and how we can use those efficiently to actually generate real data and things that we want to see inside of our Revit models. If I don't necessarily like the idea all that much of the extra data family and having an extra object. So if for whatever reason somebody comes in and says, I'm going to delete that train air handler, we don't need that one. We've got enough ability to cool our building elsewhere. So then I've got this extra little placeholder family that maybe I even hid in the model. So I can't see it in the current view necessarily. So hide in view elements, Now it goes away. Now I can't see it. So it's not something I'm going to pick up that it's still scheduling, right? I don't necessarily like that workflow per se. I'd much rather have one family that contains everything that I need in it. But again, it's an additional workflow thing that is a possibility if you don't really have any other way to do it. And still have, again, all of your shared parameters you might ever want to use built into that one place, and just snap it onto your object and call it good. So I hope that has been an interesting exercise for everyone. It's like I talked for the majority of the time about mechanical equipment and whatnot, but a placeholder family can be used by any discipline. The other thing that I would caution a little bit is on the placeholder family I made here, and I turned it into a structural foundation element. I don't know necessarily right off the top of my head, coming from a generic model family, if it actually incorporated any parameters into it directly as a category that would show any of the analytical data that might come in with real structural elements. So if we go to like visibility graphics, we look here for the analytical model categories. There's a lot of structural analytical components in there. So if there's connector bits or pieces or something like that that rely on analytical spaces, surfaces, walls, or foundations or whatnot, if those are components or extra system parameters, I would caution that if you're structural and you're going to build a placeholder family, that instead of starting with a generic model, that you would actually start with the family generation types, if I say new family. And look at my list. If I look down for structural elements, I would make my placeholder of that type with a structural foundation family instead of a generic model, because that should actually give me some extra material information, foundation thickness, length, and width. Those are already pre-built in there. And whether they have other hooks into other system parameters in Revit or not, that I'm not familiar enough to say for sure, but I expect they're slightly different than a generic model. So just a couple other quick tips there. So again, if you guys have any questions you want to ask or whatnot, the chat's open at the moment. I'll stay here for at least a few more minutes regarding that. See if I can answer anything else. If you have more questions or whatnot, feel free to contact us as well at atgusa.com. We have email addresses and things there you can contact us through. There's support and help desk areas there as well. You can submit tickets in. We'd love to hear from you and or even do some product demos and or discovery calls with you and see if there's good ways that ATG can partner with you and better understand your business and your goals and help you push the boundaries of what Revit does. This is being recorded, right? Yes, that's true. This session has been recorded. So probably within 3 to 5 days, it will be on our YouTube channel. And if you go to ATG USA, there's a resource area there that has all of our white papers, our blogs, those types of things. And there should be a link to our ATG channel on YouTube. And then once on that page, you'd be able to do a search, search and look for anything that we've done as webinars in the past. Any other questions for me today? I will be doing a follow-up blog. I did a white paper on this last month, and that's already on the website that talks about similar things to what we went over today. So if you're a reader and you want to look through some of the objectives and whatnot, it's more detailed as text there as to what I did. This was more of a free-form thought process today where we get to show some basic things and kind of explore ideas as opposed to be locked into a script in this case. And I didn't have a note in the webinar about doing a placeholder data family like I just showed. So I will probably end up writing that into a blog post as a kind of a summary of these two events that we've done so far. Can you paste the link into the blog, into the chat? Let's see, I don't have the blog written yet, but I do have the white paper. Let me see if I can find that real quick and I'll post that. I know it's on my LinkedIn page. Anybody who wants to look me up on LinkedIn, it's Bruce Johnson and ATG company name. If you find me there, you'll be able to see some of the things that I post, which are usually related to my webinars, white papers, things like that. That's another way to go find stuff that I've done personally. Let's see, ATG. And resources. So here's my ATG webpage. Since I'm showing screen anyway, might as well show how to get there. atgusa.com, and then I went to the resources page, and then if I go to, say, white papers, then there should be a search option here, I believe. There's my placeholder families right there. So if I grab that, where is my chat window? There we go. So in the chat window, that's posted there. And to get any of our white papers and whatnot, usually we have you register so we can contact you at some point or show you our newsletters, things like that. I think you can opt out of those if you don't like that kind of stuff. So up to you to use it or not in that case. But the majority of all of our stuff that we do online is going to be posted there right on our resources page. I just asked the question of our marketing team today, right before this webinar. It's like, is there a way that I go on the ATG website, go to the resources tab and do a general search across all of our content and have links to everything? So if I see the word placeholder families and I have a white paper, a webinar, and a blog, that all three of those show up on the same search list. He's like, I don't think we have that now, but that's a good idea. Because learning styles are different, right? Do I want to read a 10-page white paper? Do I want to watch a 1-hour video, or kind of get the preface of it with a 2-page blog or something like that to make sure that I'm actually interested in spending more time on the rest of the content or whatnot. So yeah, I think that'd be a fantastic idea, but I think we'd have to do some sort of indexing on our YouTube channel to get those videos to link and be referenced as indexable fields, because it's not like a normal like database where it's all held in the same place across our website and across YouTube. They're two separate physical locations to drive to. So maybe in the future we'll have something cool like that that lets you search everything all at once. Any other questions for me today? We're just a bit over time, so I want to be respectful of your time and be able to either get back to work or to lunch or whatnot. I'll leave the chat window open for about another minute or so if I don't have any other questions or comments. Because had some thought-provoking ideas on families and how they're used, whether you're the person who creates them or whether you're just an end user. Maybe you've got some ideas to go talk to your BIM manager about, or think about doing family generation on your own. How do you want that to work? And if you need help with that, let us know and we can definitely provide training services and consulting services as well. All right, not seeing anything else added to the chat window. Doesn't look like anybody else is typing or whatnot, so I'm going to shut this one down for today. Have a great day, everybody, and if we can help out, let us know. Thank you.